All right, good evening, everyone. I'm Jessica Lapointe, President of the American Federation of Government Employees, Council 220. We represent 30,000 Social Security workers nationwide. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight for Social Security past, present, and future, bringing the Wisconsin idea home for a night of nonpartisan discussion. I also want to give a special thank you to Social Security Works, tonight's event sponsor, and our esteemed panelists for donating your time this evening. As we mark Social Security's 89th anniversary, we'll explore this vital program's rich history, rooted here in Wisconsin, its current challenges and its future sustainability. I am honored to introduce our distinguished panel. We have our moderator, Vance Ann Ashby, who brings extensive experience in teaching special education students, education policy and administration, and most recently as Education Director of the Wisconsin Historical Society. We have James Roosevelt Jr., former Social Security Associate Commissioner and grandson of Franklin Delano and Eleanor Roosevelt. He offers a unique insight bridging the program's history and current policy debates. We have Martin O'Malley, Commissioner of the Social Security Administration. Mr. O'Malley brings his innovative leadership style and commitment to data-driven improvements from his experience as Baltimore's mayor and Maryland's governor. We have Nancy J. Altman, President of Social Security Works and member of the Social Security Advisory Board. She brings 5 decades of expertise in Social Security policy and advocacy. And we have, last but not least, Professor J. Michael Collins, who directs UW-Madison's Social Security Research Center. His work focuses on how programs like Social Security impact economic security and household well-being. Social Security is woven into every American life. From your first Social Security card to years of FICA contributions to your family's final benefit check. Social Security isn't just policy for me, it's personal. My father died when I was 9, and survivor benefits helped my mom, a school teacher, keep our family afloat. Those benefits helped put food on our table and kept a roof over our heads until my brother and I turned 18 years old. They helped us save money for our education, which led to my career with the Social Security Administration as a bilingual claims specialist here in Madison. Today, as the union president of the Social Security Field Workers, I fight to strengthen the program that once strengthened my family. So before I hand it over to tonight's moderator, Ms. Ashby, I would like to ask each one of you on the panel, and for those of you in the audience and at home, to think about what Social Security means to you. Let's start with Ms. Ashby. You can stay seated if you'd like. Okay.
I am a teacher by nature, and sitting at a table talking to people unnerves me. So, excuse me for my informality, but that's just who I am as a person. Good evening, everyone. As she said, Vance Ashby. I was a teacher, and a couple other things in there, but always relating to kids, especially kids with special needs. But here's a story I wanted you all to hear when we think about what Social Security means to you. Raised in a Catholic home, went to school. It wasn't a question whether I was going to college. I didn't even know you could have that question. And when I got to school, my mother was like, "You're going to go into chemistry, right?" Because I loved chemistry in high school. And I'm like, "No, I got to do this for the rest of my life." And she's like, "What are you going to do?" I said, "Teach." My mother started crying. I lived in Chicago. So if anyone knows Chicago in the 60s and 70s, the public schools were on strike every 3 years. Now, I'm in the home of a mother who's part of the state union and my father who is a steel worker. So union family all the way. And my mother said, "Well, if you're going to do that, you know you're going to have to work summers." And I'm like, "No, that's part of what's good about being a teacher. You stay there all day when you're there, and then summertime, I can party." And my mother's like, "Oh, no, you're not partying because you got to get your quarters in." What are you talking about? So at this point, I'm 20. I don't know anything about quarters and FICA and Social Security. I just know I work all day and all night, September to May, and then June, July, and August, I can party. That didn't happen until I was 35. Because every summer, my mother had me working somewhere to get these quarters in. And I don't think I fully understood quarters until I was about 40. But I told all my friends, oh no, you can't be off. You gotta work so you can get your quarters in. When I first started working for Chicago Public Schools, they didn't pay into Social Security. So the only way I could get that time was to do jobs outside of it. And thank goodness to my mom, I'm now able to collect benefits. But if it hadn't been for her explaining that to me at a young age, I wouldn't have worked those first 8 years. And I might not have gotten my 40 quarters in. And so all of my friends, I'm always telling them, make sure your kids understand quarters. I know they're like, whatever, but just make sure if they're not taking FICA out, they need to do something so they can get their quarters in. And I have a lot of friends who've been very appreciative that I helped the kids understand it early on in the process. So that's what it's meant to me as growing up.
Thank you, Vaughn. All right, so we're going to just go down the panel, and if you could just briefly tell us what Social Security means to you.
Well, first of all, it's an honor for me to be here with this panel. Our host and our moderator have firsthand experience with Social Security that is so important, including we could ask our moderator to explain the windfall elimination provision for us.
No, let's not get carried away with this now.
I just have to tell you one little side story before I really say what you want me to say. What you say about getting your quarters was ingrained in me by my mother and my mother's mother, so my other grandmother, who went back to work at the age of 65 because she didn't have quite enough quarters. When I was in grade school, she went to work at the Broadway department store at Hollywood and Vine because she didn't have enough quarters. It's not that she needed the paycheck so much as that she needed the assurance for her life, and we'll come back to that. But what Social Security means to me is really a statement about the fact that every American is entitled to be assured of the necessities of life. And a little later, I'll give you a quote from my grandfather about that. But it's that bedrock of being assured about the necessities of life. That's what Social Security means to me.
Commissioner? Yes.
This one too. So I believe that Social Security is the most far-reaching act of compassion and caring that the people of any country have ever enacted for one another. When you think about the 89 years of this program, the numbers of people that are lifted up out of poverty, that are able to live their lives with dignity, it's a humbling honor for me to be able to serve as commissioner right now, because we're headed through times where people have a hard time accessing that promise. It's not that they didn't do everything right. They earned their benefits, they earned their customer service, and I suppose that as somebody that was also, we're allowed to talk religion, huh? You're Catholic.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's all right. We all have our crosses to bear. Yeah. There's so much about this program that resonates with the traditions that I was raised in. I'm sure many of you. It's not really, it's more human than it is religious. The dignity of every person, the common good we share, the truth that we're all in this together. There is no purer mission in our federal government than that mission that we have put into motion and that we sustain of Social Security. So that's what it means to me.
And so you're going to hear a lot of common themes as we talk. I'm going to start with a personal story and then talk about what it means to me. And that is, very early in my career, I had the privilege of working and becoming very close to 3 people. 2 of them started working on Social Security in 1934. Now, the program only started in 1935. One of them actually went to the University of Wisconsin, Wilbur Cohen, who rose to the level of Secretary at that time, Health, Education, and Welfare. Today would be HHS. The other was, these were all young men, just graduated from college. It was, 1934, getting out in the middle of the Depression, and they were privileged to have these jobs. Another one just graduated from actuarial school, and they needed actuaries to come up with the Social Security program. So he was hired. He became the longest serving chief actuary in the history of the program to this day. And the third was a latecomer. He started in 1939, just as the field offices were opening. He was hired out of college to work in a field office. He rose to the level of commissioner and became the longest serving commissioner to this day again in the history of the program. So as we're all sitting here, we have a continuous thread, not just through the family connection of Jim Roosevelt, but also because the people I worked with really learned from Francis Perkins and Arthur Altmeyer and the others you'll hear about, many of whom started here in Wisconsin. They mentored me, and now I'm here talking to you. And what the program means to me is, as polarized as our nation is, and as we know, we've got an election coming up, and we're all quite nervous on both sides of it, the one issue that is not polarizing at all is Social Security. People, you can ask, and everybody polls on this issue. It's got every campaign polls on it. We poll on it, AARP, the Heritage Foundation. Doesn't matter how you ask the questions. The answers come out. They value Social Security. They believe it's going to be important to them. They believe it's going to be even more important in the future. They do not want to see it cut. They want to see it expanded. So it really is, and I think the genius of FDR and those around him, where they really understood the values, what makes the United States the United States. It's religious values, and it's also basic American values. It's the idea that we are united, that we all pull together, we all contribute, and we draw out when an insured event occurs. It's really the best of, I think, the American experiment.
Well, I want to share my other panelists. It's an honor to be here, and so thank you for the opportunity to talk with you all. I grew up in a household where I was the youngest of 5, and so our household did get Social Security, and I, as a minor probably, I was getting not a payment, but my parents were getting a payment for me. So, directly it had an effect on my development as a teenager. But I also teach about Social Security to young people, so college students, graduate students. And it's a hard thing for them to get their head around. They think of Social Security as this thing I'm going to get maybe when I'm 70, and that's really far in the future. And so they don't really understand what the FICA money goes to and how social insurance works. And then we start to talk about things like disability. What if you got hit by a car? It happens. What if you were injured and you couldn't work anymore? What if your spouse or partner passed away? How would you survive? So these risks and shocks that people face start to make it more realistic. And so I think for me too, it's that I've been lucky, knock on wood, then to not need that support. But there's also the risk that I could live to be 100 or 120. I don't have that kind of savings. I still face that risk, and Social Security really is an insurance against me outliving my savings, which I hope happens. But I think those are the kinds of things that people don't always get about the program. And so, for me, it really is cradle to grave, and we really have a system that can support people when times are tough. It really is that sort of pillar that can keep people going.
Thank you all. Vance, the floor is yours.
Scoot up some closer to the mic. Although I have a naturally outside voice, but we'll use the mic for recording purposes. Mr. Roosevelt, How does today's social security system align with or differ from your grandfather's original version?
So, all right, the question was, how does Social Security, as it exists today, align with or differ from my grandfather's vision of Social Security? And while some of the operational details are different, and while things were added to the program, although many of them were things that he wanted in the program initially, he even wanted health care in the program initially, but didn't feel he could get it through the Congress at the same time that he did retirement. I think it aligns very well today with what he set out to do under the guidance of Francis Perkins and others in 1935. I said to you a few minutes ago that I was going to mention a quote of his, one of my favorites from him, which is, "We can never insure 100% of the population against 100% of the hazards and vicissitudes of life. But we have tried to frame a law which will give some measure of protection to the average citizen and to his family against the loss of a job and against poverty-ridden old age." To me, that captures it then, and that captures it now. And the program has survived because it is, as the commissioner said a few minutes ago, it is right at the essence of what we are as Americans with values of caring for each other. It has survived. It has been blessed with some very effective commissioners like Commissioner Altmaier and Commissioner Ball, and it has suffered from commissioners who did not really believe in the program, much as the Postal Service is right now suffering from. And we are so fortunate to have a commissioner now who not only believes in the program, but understands how to make things be done effectively. You can't do it overnight, and you can't do it without funding, and that's the big crunch. And I hope we'll talk about that a little bit more in this discussion. People know, as my grandfather said, that he designed it and he promoted it with the dedicated payroll tax system so that no damn politician would dare take it away. History is always interesting because you can always find, well, he didn't write those words, somebody else wrote them and he said them. Anyway, but that's what he believed. The fact is that because of its design, it's never attacked head on by the people who don't see government as an instrument of assuring the things that my grandfather called for. It's attacked by underfunding. It's attacked by, therefore, because of underfunding, understaffing, by not keeping up to date technologically and so on. There has to be great efforts to design the right program, the right operations, and then work really hard to get Congress to provide the funding. So we can talk more about that, but that to me is the essence of, as Nancy suggested, no one attacks it head on, so it doesn't go away. But you can die of 1,000 cuts also. The great, yes, the great work done by the retirement research centers. I had the privilege when I was associate commissioner of being here for the inauguration of the research center here at Madison. The great work done there lets us understand the present and the future of Social Security. And it's an ongoing effort to do it right. And I think my grandfather would be very pleased with how it has persevered, and how when we get a commissioner who really believes in it and who really understands how to make government work, we make progress.
If I can just add, if it's all right, that from that same quote that Jim gave us, that was President Roosevelt signed Social Security into law on August 14th, 1935. And in that same statement, he said it was a cornerstone, by no means complete, on which to build. And they didn't want, and he and the people around him really defined Social Security much more broadly than we do today. They defined it as basic economic security. So they understood you needed a good education, you needed guaranteed employment, you needed a living wage, you needed health care, you needed disability insurance, short-term and long-term, you needed sick pay. They envisioned all of that, but he himself said, and Francis Perkins said, that they didn't want to start too ambitiously because it was too important to not be successful. And it was the largest undertaking that any government had taken up till that point. So they were very careful. But the basic structure of what we now think of as Social Security was put in place back in 1935. I sometimes read articles where people are saying, conservatives saying, oh, this isn't what he is. He wouldn't recognize it today. It's so much, more than he. Ridiculous. And my answer to that is, he would recognize it, but he'd say to all of us, "This is all you've done. You haven't added more to this."
Thank you both. Thank you both for responding. I have a question for you, Ms. Altman. How has the program expanded since 1935?
Excellent, and as I said, it really fits with what I just said. It was a cornerstone. So just 4 years later, survivors insurance and family spousal benefits, children's benefits were added because, again, they saw it as incremental growth. Then, of course, we had World War II, and FDR famously said he was Dr. New Deal was being replaced with Dr. Win the War, because of course we were entering into World War II. And then it was Republican control of Congress in the late 1950s, and they did not want to expand Social Security. But starting in the 50s, the number of Americans covered by the program was expanded, so it was what it is today, which is virtually everyone is covered. In 1956, disability insurance was added, again, long-term disability. In 1965, they had tried, as Jim said, the original goal was to have guaranteed health insurance, national universal health insurance, provided as part of the 1935 Act, but they just thought that that could bring the whole bill down. But then in 1944, in fact, after FDR's inaugural address in his State of his State of the Union, he called for an economic Bill of Rights, the second Bill of Rights that had a lot of this in it. But then he passed away. Truman fought for health insurance, and finally by 1965, they said, okay, we got to do this incrementally. And they debated whether to add children first or seniors first, and they decided to go with seniors, which was just supposed to be the first step towards Medicare for all. Then in 1972, Medicare was expanded to include disability, people with disabilities. The Supplemental Security Income Program, a very important companion program, was added. And a very important addition was automatic indexing of benefits so that they don't erode over time. And you don't have to wait for Congress to act. But that was more than 50 years ago, and it has not been expanded since. But fortunately, at least the Democrats in Congress have introduced a number of bills to expand those benefits. So I think we may see in the future, that's certainly what should be done and what the American people want and what makes sense.
Thank you. Thank you for your response. One moment, everyone.
So Nancy now is going to lead us through a slideshow showing you all the Wisconsin connection to the Social Security Administration.
Yes.
Take it away, Nancy.
People, all of you from Wisconsin, you should feel very proud because much of what we have as economic security is a result of what started in Wisconsin. So I guess the first slide. So as you know, we had the Depression with the crash of the stock market in 1929, and this says 25% were unemployed at its height. I think it was actually even higher. It was about 1/3 were unemployed. Hidden in the shadows were children, of course, of the workers, but also their aging parents, because at that time people worked as long as they could, but they couldn't work forever, and if they and they generally routinely moved in with their adult children. If their adult children couldn't bring them in or take them in, they literally went to the poorhouse. So poverty among old age was a severe issue well before the Depression, but the Depression really put it front and center. Next slide. So when President Roosevelt won and was inaugurated, he had to immediately focus on the crisis with the banks that all closed, and there were just, and the stock market, of course, had crashed, and he really was focused on, FDIC and other kinds of things, getting the banks reopened. But as soon as that was done, he really looked for permanent solutions: minimum wage, maximum hours, collective bargaining, and of course, Social Security. And here's where we start getting into the Wisconsin connection and the Wisconsin idea. As I said, I started working for two young men, people who were young men in 1934. They weren't young when I met them. And that was that President Roosevelt, in order to put together and it was broad-based, not just the old age, not just what we think of as Social Security, but it was health insurance and welfare programs and disability and a variety of things. He put together an intergovernment agency called the Committee on Economic Security. The executive director of that was Ed Whitty, who had been teaching at the University of Wisconsin. Had been a student at the University of Wisconsin and was working in the Wisconsin government. And here is the Wisconsin idea. So let me start with John Commons. And his name, as you hear, Commons, really fit. He was a labor economist who believed in common men and women and helping their cause, and also the idea of all of us together, the commons. So he graduated from Oberlin in, let me see if I can see my notes here. I think in 1876, or no, 1888. And he went to Johns Hopkins, where a Professor Ely was teaching there. And the reason he wanted to go and study with Ely was there had been an editorial in the Baltimore paper criticizing Ely for all of his socialist ideas. And John Commons went, "Ooh, I think that sounds good to me." So he went, and Ely had, when he graduated from Columbia in 1876, there were no graduate programs in economics at the time. So he studied in Germany, which was ahead of us. It was Bismarck that really started Social Security and health insurance and all of these programs, which we value today. So he studied with Ely, and then Ely was lured away and came to the University of Wisconsin. And then Commons was looking after he graduated, and Ely said, "Okay, you come with me." So we had Commons and Ely, and Commons started La Follette fighting Bob La Follette was the governor, and the head of the new president of Wisconsin, Chris Van Hise, believed that education, and this is really the Wisconsin idea, that professors should do more than write academic pieces and teach their students, as important as that is, but they should really use their knowledge and education and research to make lives better for everyone. And Wisconsin, Madison was the perfect place, because as you know, symbolically, you've got State Street that's connecting the university to the state capitol, to the government. And you have it's very easy to go one place or the other. And so Commons started working on workers' compensation. He formed the American Association of Labor Legislation to try to get, he was, teaching full-time, but trying really to influence, come together with model legislation. And Wisconsin was kind of the experiment with, as I say, workers' compensation. They thought about health insurance. They thought about old age pensions, all of those things that were very hard to get done on a state level, and especially after but he was really working on that. And one of the people he worked with was Charles McCarthy. So there you have the three of them, Ely and Commons and McCarthy. So one thing that Commons did was to have he had these Friday night dinners where or Friday night events where he'd invited students to come. And the people who came every week, he'd have them, and they were called Friday Nighters. And there were all kinds of people. I mentioned Ed Whitty. A few years, they overlapped, but he was a little bit younger, was Arthur Altmeyer. So when Whitty graduated from college, he went the University of Wisconsin, he just went down State Street and started working on legislation. And he met Altmeyer from his days going to those Friday night dinners, and he hired Arthur Altmeyer. Then Arthur Altmeyer's counterpart was Frances Perkins. So he got to know Frances Perkins because she was in New York doing exactly what he was doing in Wisconsin. Then luck would have it, Franklin Roosevelt was elected. Frances Perkins was named and insisted she would only take the job if President Roosevelt agreed to push legislation like Social Security, which he agreed to do. As soon as that happened, as soon as she got in, she hired Arthur Altmeyer, and he now hired Ed Whitty. So I think that's the end, or is there one more? So another of Arthur Altmeyer. And here is the president signing the Social Security Act. So without Wisconsin, we probably wouldn't have Social Security. We certainly wouldn't have it in the form we have it in now.
So there we go, on Wisconsin.
On Wisconsin, there you go.
Great, thank you so much for that. I do agree she deserves an applause. The first time I met her was Monday evening when we were prepping for this, and she started telling me these stories, and a lot of what she knows and what she learned on it early on were from the guys that we just heard about. So
Yes.
it's like that direct connection, and I just sat there in awe as she shared her stories with us, so thank you again.
And all of these people chose public service and really have contributed so greatly to our country. So thank you, Wisconsin, for producing them.
Add to that just a little bit, that in case you have not been to Baltimore, to the headquarters of Social Security, the main building is the Altmeyer building to this day. And Frances Perkins had been my grandfather's, in state government in Albany, his Secretary of Labor. She became his Secretary of Labor in the federal government, and she was the first woman ever to serve in a presidential cabinet and the only person to serve in all 4 FDR administrations.
And how fitting that she was the first woman to have down the block, perhaps the first woman president will come down.
All
There
right.
you go. Not talking politics. Professor Collins, how does UW-Madison's research continue to shape Social Security policy?
Well, we definitely are standing on the shores of giants, right? So that was a great overview. And there's so many buildings and, just really historic mentions of the people that we just talked about. It really is part of the legacy of Wisconsin, and we're very, very proud of it. So I think I'm gonna go ahead and do the slides if they're working. We'll get there. Wisconsin today is part of a network of academic researchers around the country that study issues related to Social Security programs. And sometimes when I talk about this, people assume it's just old age programs. It really is, everything from low birth weight babies to end of life. And so it's the whole spectrum. But I think I'll go up and share the slides if that works. So as we teach and talk to students and the public about what Social Security does, we often use this idea of social insurance, which is really the framework that the economists that were behind this program, even Bismarck's envision of Germany, was really this idea of social insurance. We pay a premium, just like you pay a premium for your car insurance or your home insurance, and then when times are tough, we can make a claim that we need help, and that claim can help us out. And these programs, partly what happened with Wisconsin being the birthplace of some of this is we had this was the railroad sort of crossroads, and so we had a lot of farmers coming in, many who came from Scandinavian countries and German countries, and they basically formed their own mutual associations to support each other. They formed mutual insurance among farmers, among the people in the dairy industry, whatever. If somebody was injured, everybody else would take care of their spouse or their kids. And so that sort of happened organically, and those programs got sort of codified in some of the state programs and then later the national programs. But if we think about social insurance framework and how that affects what we do with Social Security today. So the SSDI program, it's the shock of having a disability where you can't work anymore, where somebody has worked and they've done everything that they can do, but they just can't put the time in. That's about 8 million people in the U.S. today who have claimed and gotten SSDI payments, their family members. And then we have the big program. This is the program most people think of, which is the old age program, where people can claim in old age. And as I said, that's not really about what age you claim. It's what age you live to. It's an insurance against living a really long time. None of us can save enough money to live to be 110. I hope we all live to be 110. But it would be very hard to come up with enough savings to cover that. And as Jessica said, there's survivors. Survivors is critical for families, and especially children, to be able to have the death of a spouse or a wage earner. That's about 6 million people in the U.S. and their families. And then SSI, the supplemental security, which is really critical. It's not, let's be honest, it's not that much money. We're talking about $600 a month, $7,000 a year. But for many families, it's that or nothing. It really is the subsistence that's keeping almost 8 million people going, and then access to all the programs that come with it. If we think about Wisconsin specifically, it's 1.3 million people. We're a state of 6 million people. 1.3 million people are getting some form of Social Security. It's almost 1 in 4 people. So this is a really broad-ranging program in this state. As we think about how people use Social Security, we have to remember, too, that it's not Social Security in a vacuum. They're using Social Security and they're not using Medicare or Medicaid or their employer health insurance they might get. They could also be getting help with food. They could be getting help with housing. There's so many different interactions between Social Security and other programs that the experience for people out there in the world is that this is the bedrock, but then there's all these other supports that they get too. And so a lot of our research is actually in how these programs interact with each other and how these programs overall help people's financial well-being. And as I said, we really do focus on this idea of well-being. It's not about the dollar amount. It's about what level of consumption people can sustain. So yes, it is very important that people have enough money as they retire. But more important is that they have enough money to keep their health, that they're able to take care of the things they need to have healthy diets, that they have safe housing, to really avoid those hardships that we think, whether it's somebody who's on SSI or SSDI or at old age, There's a really important interaction between Social Security and caregiving. If you do not have Social Security for your parent, you're probably the caregiver, which is going to impede your ability to work and save and yourself have financial security. And we see that in countries that don't have a social insurance program, it's women who particularly take the brunt because they end up having to take care of not only their own kids, but their parents. They can't work, they don't get as much education, and that sort of cycle continues. There's lots of connections too with, as we see people being able to save, put away money that they need in case of an emergency, and then children's development. Children who have access to, for example, SSI, have access to better health care. They're going to have better, be starting school better prepared to learn and have better health outcomes over their lifetime. So this well-being approach really is a big part of the research that we do. Let's talk a little bit about what the effect of Social Security is. And especially when we're thinking about the old age programs, it keeps a lot of people out of poverty. The poverty rates would be much higher among older people were it not for Social Security. If we took away the Social Security payment, we'd have almost double the poverty rate, particularly among older people. And what's important is this isn't really, so a lot of issues we look at, there's this huge gap by race. You know, if we look at black versus white or Hispanic versus white, all races really benefit. This is not a program that's, you know, essentially racially gendered. It benefits people of color just as much, if not more, than other programs. The other thing we have to think about too is kids. There are a lot of kids who get support from Social Security. You know, if we look at the children under 18, especially, the poverty rate would be 2 points higher for them were it not for Social Security. But if we look at people age 65 and older, the poverty rate would be 3 times as high, were it not for Social Security. So it really is an important program. In Wisconsin, it's over 300,000 seniors who are kept out of poverty by Social Security. So it's a huge impact on people in the state. We've just recently done some research where we look at grand families, which is a growing trend, where you have either 3 generations in one household or you have a grandparent taking care of a grandchild. It could be many reasons. Disability is one. Death of a child who has kids, so you become the dependent caregiver, and incarceration. There's a whole bunch of issues that we see this rise in families where it is the grandparent or grandfamily who's taking care of kids. And we can see, and that we've done some data in Wisconsin working with the state agencies here, that for these households, Social Security is really critical. It's not just the old age insurance, it's the SSDI and the SSI. It's helping these grandfamilies, these grandparents who are taking care of kids, stay out of poverty. And it's been an important trend that we've seen. We also are able to look at where Social Security payments are distributed across the state. And for sure, there's a lot of poverty across Wisconsin, right? So we know that there's big pockets of poverty, and particularly in central Wisconsin. But in northern Wisconsin, it's an aging population. We have just a larger number of people. And so in some counties in Wisconsin, more than half of the population is getting Social Security payments of some kind. So it is a really important part of the economy in much of the state. And so for much of the state, this is a really critical program. All right, so that was a long-winded way to get to the answer to this question. So, you know, we are part of the Retirement and Disability Research Consortium. We're one of 6 academic centers across the country. We have over 200 faculty who are working on research projects, not just at Wisconsin, all across the country. We've also supported more than 150 students, graduate students and junior faculty in a partnership with Howard University to really try to bring new and different voices into this research community. So trying to expand who is in that mix. And it's resulted in some really new and different studies. You know, researchers who are looking at, you know, we had a study recently where they were looking at people who started a retirement account with an employer but forgot about it, so-called abandoned accounts. Turns out there's billions of dollars of people who have savings that they could use for retirement, but they forgot about it, and what states are doing to try to track down those funds so that the owners can get back to them. Studies looking at what's been the effect of COVID on both older people and people with disabilities, and how long COVID is affecting people's ability to get back to work. Studies looking at the interactions between Social Security and child support, and how child support is a really important part of what both parents are able, the custodial parent is able to provide, but also becomes a real burden on the parent making the payments. So just all these interactions with different systems, whether it's the justice system, incarceration, with the SNAP and food assistance programs, and trying to understand what those are like. So clearly, after 89 years, we still have a long way to go to understand the populations and their needs, and also how the programs can develop over time. And so this cooperative agreement, we spend a lot of time working with staff. Many of these projects are in cooperation with members of the research community within SSA. So it's been a great opportunity. So I'll stop there.
Those figures that you're giving really are true nationwide. I mean, the Social Security Administration collects a lot of data, and it's just to emphasize, Social Security is the nation's largest children's program, though most people don't realize that. And it also, I think there's a multiplier effect for every dollar of benefits. It produces about $2 of economic activity, so it creates jobs.
Thank you both. Commissioner O'Malley, what's your biggest achievement and challenge in improving benefit access during your first year here?
Biggest achievement, biggest challenge. I think the biggest achievement thus far is to give the hardworking men and women of this agency a true reason to believe that it's going to get better at the agency, that they're going to be able to deliver the same high level of customer service that we once did not so many days ago. I can't say that we've overcome all of the challenges that come about when Congress reduces our staffing to a 50-year low, while us baby boomers make our customer base climb to an all-time high. But the reason the ability for us to believe that we can make it better is, I think, probably my biggest achievement so far. You know, Jim, let me give you just a couple of quick examples. We used to have people waiting on hold for an hour, hour and a half when they called our 800 number for benefits they had already earned. We have a 24% attrition rate in the teleservice centers, and it's a hard job. Ever try to talk to somebody when they've been on hold for an hour and a half? Not a pleasant conversation. So the men and women of this agency have been able to reduce that average speed to answer now down to 11 and a half minutes. And we're not done yet. We've moved to a new, more modern platform that's going to give us the ability to do true customer relations management, just like you expect from your bank and the other people you work for. The second thing we've been able to do as an agency is we looked at the policies that were shameful for all of us to see on 60 Minutes, when we would recoup 100% of a beneficiary's check if, through a mistake we made, we overpaid them. But they didn't get to us quickly enough. The default setting was we would intercept 100% of that check. We stopped that in April. We don't do that anymore as an agency. And the third one, which is still the thing that keeps me up at night, is that in the disability program, we now have a backlog of almost 1.2 million cases. And a little known fact, but each of the 50 states and Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia run these offices that Social Security pays for the salaries of these state employees to make the determination about whether a person is disabled and incapable of doing the work they used to or to be able to do. There are now 30,000 Americans that die waiting in line for just that initial disability determination. In my own home state of Maryland, it can take 366 days. South Carolina has one of the worst at 388 days. And if you appeal, guess where you go for the appeal? Back to the same office to wait that same amount of time. So we are now doing a lot of things in terms of changing policy that we have the power to control, improving business processes, and we've now gone 18 weeks in a row of closing more cases on the back end than were opened on the front end. It's a little bit of a down payment. One more reason to believe is, as I look into some of the faces of the hardworking employees I saw today at the Madison, Wisconsin field office. But let me tell you what the biggest challenge is. The biggest challenge is serving more customers than ever with staffing levels that Congress has reduced to a 50-year low. What does that mean in real terms in Madison? It means an office that in 2019 had 28 employees is now trying to serve a lot more customers with only 17 employees. And you can see it yourself if you go into the field offices. You look around and you see that the field offices might have a lot more open windows, but nobody's there. It's not because people aren't working. It's because the numbers of people have been reduced. As Congress for 10 years in a row, never even gave Social Security a budget hearing. We had our first budget hearing in 10 years. But that's after the damage was done. Now, fortunately, President Biden has put in additional funding for customer service. And for all of you that worked hard your whole lives, guess what? The dollars for that customer service comes out of the same dollars you put in for your benefits. They aren't discretionary, they are mandatory. Our customer service should be mandatory too. It was until the early 90s, and then this downward trend started. But we're going to pull out of it. The big challenge is that more customers than ever, fewer staff than in 50 years. And nonetheless, we are still managing because of these hardworking people. The yin and yang that I've learned, I've only been at the agency for a year, little less than a year, 9 months. What makes some of these men and women continue to hang in is the purity of the mission. Their belief that their work matters, that it touches in important ways like a lifeline other Americans throughout the country. That's what makes them stay at work. What makes them depressed, what makes them demoralized is to see that they're not able to fulfill that mission as they could just a few years ago. And both of these things, this challenge of customer service, I truly believe is linked to the longer term solution to keep Social Security going into the next 75 years, the next 89 years. If we can we have to restore trust in the agency today in order to create enough oxygen in the halls of Congress to create the long-term future for Social Security so that we're never facing an event, till we don't have to face an event where we might see a 17% reduction in benefits because we failed to act. We can act. We're Americans. Think about what FDR did going through a war, and somebody could have said to him, well, we've never had big enemies like this. We probably don't have enough bandwidth as a country to also do Social Security. We're Americans. We do big things. We often do them at the same time. Not only can we walk and chew gum, we can win world wars, we can create social justice. Lincoln was facing a civil war, and yet that didn't stop him from creating a telegraph network across the nation, land-grant colleges, and also ushering in an industrial revolution with the transcontinental railroads. So anyway, thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner, our fearless leader. I'd like to take a moment out of the program to recognize the heroes of the Social Security Administration. They're here tonight. They're watching at home. They are the workers. They are the frontline workers. So, Gail Hummel, will you please stand up and say hello? Gail came back to work in her retirement because she missed us and loved us so much. And this has been my Social Security family for the last 15 years as well. So these are my personal friends. Tammy, Severin, will you stand up and say hello? Tammy's a generalist claims specialist here in Madison. Amanda, you say hello? And then in the back we have Claire. Claire, say hello. Claire just got out of training. Good job. Beatrice. Beatrice is new. Bless you. Thank you for joining us. Joe. Joe is here doing amazing things, great ideas. Our supervisor, Rochelle. Rochelle, say hello. Rochelle has been with me through thick and thin in my life, and I thank you for that. and John Schluter, our fearless area director who leads us every day. And now I'm going to hand the microphone over to Vance, your moderator, and she's going to share her story.
She's looking at me and I'm looking at her like, I'm going to stay seated right now because I've got some medical issues. So I told you about up until like the first 5 years of me teaching, working summers for my mother. Actually, it was for me, but I thought it was because of my mother. So speed up to about 20 years of teaching. Still enjoying my career, and I'm very fortunate that I actually had a career that I enjoyed all of my life. But I started having some problems. Long story short, I was diagnosed with lupus. Lupus is an autoimmune disease, but it's called an invisible disease because you don't look like you're sick. And God knows I've heard that, well, you don't look like anything's wrong with you. So I was put on medicine and I kept working, and there was a point I was on like 90 milligrams of prednisone a day, which if anybody knows about prednisone, I look like a weeble. Weebles wobble, but don't fall down. Seriously, I look like a weeble. And my custodian for the school at the time said he would follow me as I walked up the stairs because he thought I was going to fall backwards. I mean, it was just that intense. But I kept working because that's what you do, right? You work. So I'm turning 55 now. I've been very fortunate to have really good medical care throughout my life. And we were just talking about how Medicare has changed. Mr. Roosevelt was sharing his stories of people he knows with lupus and the difference that has happened. So I'm starting to feel tired more. I'm starting to get easily confused. I'm having a real hard time writing things. Now, I wrote a law for the state of Wisconsin, but now I can barely write a paragraph to send to staff members. And this is when I was with the Wisconsin Historical Society. So I went into my doctor at 54, and she said, well, you know, less than 50% of the people with lupus work full-time after 55. And I'm like, I ain't got no problems. Just keep giving me meds. I'll be fine. You know, I'm going. 55 comes, and I'm feeling a little slower, and I'm getting a little more confused, like, where's the Walgreens at now? But I'm like, well, you know, you're driving around, and there's a lot of stuff going on. You know, just multitasking, I need to back away. Go to see her, and she's like, you know, you're at 55, it's coming. I'm like, I'm fine. See, you see me? I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me. Between 55 and 56 is when things got really rough for me. I literally drove up to a gas station, and I could not remember what you do to get the gas into your car. To try to figure out where a card goes, to put it where on the machine, and then I was totally lost, totally lost. I got back in my car and started crying and called my best friend. And she said, and to this day I do it, she said, drive around the block, it'll be a reset for you. Drove out, drove around the block, came back. It was like, oh, yeah, get gas, no problem. But that kind of stuck in my head. If I'm forgetting something simple that I do every day, every other day like that, what else am I not getting done? And then I realized there were things that I was not getting done at work, but they were nice enough to not bug me about it, or someone else would pick it up. In my personal life, things had happened, and everybody was really nice. One of the big things between 55 and 56 was my language. So I don't think I've had any glitches tonight, but there are times when I will reverse words. I won't remember the name of something, and so I can describe it in great detail. You know, it's a box that's made out of wood. It's got those planks in it, and you put books on it, a bookshelf. But I can't remember the word bookshelf. I can just remember what it looks like, so I can describe it. And then I started getting lost coming home. I would be within a half a mile of my house and couldn't remember. I'd look around and it was like I was in a different city. None of the places around me were landmarks that I could recognize. And I remember my friend saying, put your home address into your Waze, it's a GPS app to show you directions. So whenever that happens, just stop, pull over, take a deep breath, and hit home. And I've used it more times than I'd like to admit now. At that point, I went into my doctor and said, okay, this is getting a little scary. And the one that really pulled the pulled the plug for me was when my mom passed. She was living in Vegas, and I was working on her, emptying her condo, and I was talking to some of her friends, and I had a conversation with them, or at least I thought I had a conversation with them. Later, they told me that I was speaking gibberish. Like, I would talk, but it wasn't a language, it was just gibberish. And I thought, okay, I need to go to my doctor. They did an MRI, yada, yada. At 59, she said, okay, that's it. You need to apply for disability, because it's not going to get better as you get older. And you're starting to get frustrated, which is making your lupus worse because of stress. So here's my wonderful thank you so much to that area of Social Security, your regional office, because you guys, through COVID, were there for me. I was so confused. You think I couldn't find my way home? Those forms, I thought I was going to slit my throat. There's no way I'm going to get through any of this. And I would call once a week, God bless you, and somebody would pick up the phone and say, we got this, Vance, you can do this, and help me with every single question I had. Every time I called. They didn't say I was a bother, they didn't say, nothing. My last part of it was, they went through all the records and stuff, and they said, you have to go see a psychologist. And I'm like, okay, I'm not crazy, but yeah, whatever. Lately, I don't know what I am. I go to the psych, and we have a conversation. Now, I'm the special ed background. I've evaluated many kids in my life, so I know the spiel as far as evaluation. I'm like, so when are you going to test me? I've been there 45 minutes now. And she's like, oh, I don't have to test you. I said, well, what does that mean? She said, oh, you qualify. What do you mean I qualify? She said, you definitely have a cognitive issue. I ain't got no cognitive issue, lady. And she said, you are the first person who's ever sat in my office and argued with me whether they had a disability or not. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess I do. But because I had worked all of my life with students with disabilities, in my mind, I had visions of what a disability was. And my cognition wasn't a disability to me. I mean, yeah, I was screwed up, but I didn't realize that could be a disability. So I did all the paperwork, got all the forms in, and I did qualify for SSDI when I was 59. And it has improved my quality of life. At this point in my life, I can't work. I don't work. But I'm not anxious about it. I'm not worried about it. I'm finally relaxing and trying to figure out things. So I joined a quilting group in August, and I'm actually in a show in December with my quilt. And they were like, you should bring your quilt. Well, of course, I forgot it. But it's a pretty quilt. Take my word for it. It's a very pretty quilt. But that SSDI, for me, it helps me feel secure in where I am in my life. I don't have any children. I'm not married. My mom, dad, and both grandparents are deceased, and I never had any brothers or sisters. So I'm kind of, in a way, an orphan in my world. I have a lot of friends who, I'm sure if I was in deep doo-doo, they would come and back me up. But, there's times when you don't want to do that. You want to stand on your own. I've been proud of being able to do that, and this just helps me do that a little better, feel more secure in who I am. So that's my story with SSDI. I know people have horror stories of the phone calls and all of that. I was thankful I did not. And it's just Madison Department, Madison office that helped me through all of that craziness when I thought this isn't making any sense. And they're like, no, we're not giving up. What do you have a question about today? You guys were always there, and I greatly appreciate it. So I wanted to thank you guys myself. Okay, back to real work.
Well, before that, Vance, thank you so much for sharing that. And you represent, you were saying 8 million Americans are receiving disability benefits. And thank you to the commissioner and everyone here and everyone across the country who's working for the Social Security Administration. Just one sort of like quick story, but similar. A friend had her spouse pass away, made an appointment at the Social Security office, went into the office, and the claims representative came out and gave her a hug. And she said she will never forget that. It meant so much to her, and that's not something a computer can do or you get over a phone call. So thank you. But thank you, all of you, for you really make this country what it is.
especially for those of us who need the benefits. And I've worked with many a student with special educational needs and their families who qualified for SSI, and it made the world of difference for those kids. Extra tutoring, extra support for the family to take care of that kid. You know, modifications on that wheelchair that didn't quite meet the range for Medicare to kick in, but because of SSI money, they were able to do the modifications for that kid. So another thank you, Commissioner, for those people too, because it made a world of difference for my students over the years. I'm just going to shut up here. I can see you moving your hand.
No. I just want to quickly before we move on, because we are going to dispel some common claims or misbeliefs about the system, and we want to hear from our audience as well, and some final thoughts from the panelists. But the commissioner talked about the need to fund the Social Security Administration, and as workers, we see that every day. When I started with the program back in 2009, it took just 2 months to get approved for the disability program. And I remember very clearly a woman who was in very dire straits, and I took a claim from her. I spent a lot of time with her, listening to her story, and she really left an impact. She was living in her ex-husband's basement, and she was just really distraught about not being able to work and her living conditions. And so when she was approved after 2 months, I gave her a phone call to let her know. And she thanked me, and she started crying, and she said, "You saved my life," because I had made a plan to take it within a week if I did not hear from you. And I think about her almost every day, because right now it takes, 8 months to get a decision? So we would not have been able to save her. And so when the commissioner says that statistic where 30,000 Americans are dying while waiting for a decision, that is unacceptable. And that is something that we need to work at as a nation to fix, to fund Social Security properly to meet public demand and make sure we're saving as many lives as possible, because if you've paid into the system your entire life, you deserve your benefits to come timely and accurately. All right, so moving on here.
Nancy. So, I think you're going to be the one on the hot seat. Tell me what the truths are behind the headlines about Social Security and bankruptcy. Please let me know, because I need to plan accordingly.
And thank you for that question. I'm sure others will want to jump in as well. There is so much misinformation and disinformation about Social Security, and that is definitely one. Jim talked about death by 1,000 cuts, and we talked about how popular this program is. When the program first began, it was a Democratic program. Republicans voted against it, and conservatives called it socialism, and they said it's an improper role of government and all of that stuff, which is fine. I mean, in a democracy, you have those conversations and you have those debates. But the American people consistently sided with the program and said, no, we want this program. They understood its value and its importance. Then around the late 1970s, early 1980s, all of a sudden, everybody loves Social Security. You can never find a politician who says socialism or we shouldn't be doing this. But they say, we love this program, but it's unaffordable. It's going bankrupt. We can't support it. Here is the truth, and it's so ironic. There are about 40 actuaries in the Social Security Administration. It's an insurance program, so they have actuaries who every day look at the income and the outgo of the program. There's no question that Social Security is affordable. It currently costs about 5% of gross domestic product. At the end of the 21st century, that's going to be around 6% of gross domestic product. Just to put that number in context, we spent, I think, about 2.5% of GDP when baby boomers unexpectedly showed up at kindergarten on education. We spent that on much more than that 1% after 9/11, when we had to build up, we had all the expenditures for military. We spent way more than that in response to COVID. There's no question that Social Security is affordable. The question of whether we expand it or we cut it is a question of values, nothing else. So here's the truth behind those headlines. And that is, as I say, there are about 40 actuaries who are working for Commissioner O'Malley. And they, every day, are looking at, all these, what's wage growth, what's labor force participation, what's fertility rates, what's mortality rates. They're figuring out to make sure that benefits can always be paid. Now, most private pensions have valuation periods of about 20 years. Germany has 25 years for its Social Security program. The OECD has 45 years. The United States is an outlier. The actuaries project out 3/4 of a century. The program's only been around for 89 years, but they project out 3/4 of a century. And the point is to assure the American people that it's being closely monitored. Now, whenever you project out that far, you're sometimes going to have unexpected surpluses. You're sometimes going to have unexpected shortfalls. But there's an annual report every year, so Congress has plenty of time to act. Congress, will act. I sometimes have, if Congress were not to act, there is a shortfall that's being projected, and they have to act. They've got about a decade, and it's a modest, very manageable shortfall. There are all kinds of legislation the Democrats have introduced. Republicans haven't introduced any, with no benefit cuts, but requiring the wealthiest to pay more, that restores it to balance and in fact expands benefits. There's no question in my mind Congress will act. Not only if they didn't act and there was an automatic 17% cut in benefits, which is what would happen like overnight, not only would every member of Congress be voted out of office, but they wouldn't even make it to the election. They'd be chased down the street. People would be so angry. So the question isn't, will Congress act? The question is, what will they do when they act? Social Security has never missed a payment, and it never will. I don't know if anyone else wants
Thank
to-
you, thank you, thank you.
Can I add something
Please
on
do,
that?
please do.
I learned something when I met with our actuary, Steve Goss. I asked him, what did we get wrong
Oh, this is
such
good.
that the surplus that was built up to cover the baby boomers, and maybe Nancy, you discussed that, but in 1982, they knew this demographic bulge of the baby boomers, people my age, were going to be coming through, and so they intentionally, Congress and the president, built up a large surplus reserve. And they're anticipated that that would last through the lifetimes of the baby boomers. But other changes happened after 1982 that took a lot of the earned income in the United States of America and concentrated it in the top 6% of the American earning public. So instead of that depletion of the surplus that had been built up happening in, 2060 was?
2057.
Instead of it happening in 2057, it got moved up to now 2035. It was actually going to be 2034, but better than expected job growth across every quintile of the American earning public pushed it out another year. But so when some in Congress, and I'm not in the policy proposing mode, that's for Congress and that's for the president. When people in Congress propose asking those that make more than $400,000 to start paying into the system again, it is not without some justification. Because right now, all of us pay in up to the first $168,800. It's an elegantly simple program which we pay as we go. So there's dollars that come in, get paid out to the beneficiaries, and the little differential we take from the surplus reserve. But most of the bills that have been proposed are really about addressing the truth that if you're a nurse working here in Madison at a hospital, you pay in every 2 weeks for your entire year. But somebody like Warren Buffett stops paying anything into Social Security after the first 20 seconds of the new year. So, the ball hasn't even gotten all the way to the bottom of Times Square before Warren Buffett starts paying. But the rest of us pay all the time. So most Americans, a lot of us are not aware of that. A lot of members in Congress aren't aware of that. But the reason that depletion event got moved up was because instead of having 90% of earnings paying into Social Security, it ended up only being 81% of earnings because of that income inequality, the concentrated wealth out of the bracket to which Social Security applies. And so it's...
I am so glad you raised that, if I can
Sure.
jump in, because that's it, the Commissioner is exactly right. After the Congress last acted Social Security amendments, 1983, they did their 75-year projection, as they always do. That took it to 2057. So why is it 20 years sooner? What was not anticipated and really couldn't be anticipated was the unbelievable and destabilizing income and wealth inequality. Now, the last time we had that kind of income and wealth inequality was in the 1920s, before the Great Depression. And what did President Roosevelt do and Congress, the Democratic Congress, do in response? They created the minimum wage, they gave workers the right to collectively bargain, and they created Social Security. What should Congress do? I am in the, not policy making, but policy advocating business, so I can say, what I think we should be doing now is raising the minimum wage, strengthening the ability for workers to collectively bargain, and expand Social Security.
Commissioner, I'd like to ask one more question if you don't mind. Can you tell us the truth about immigrants and Social Security and financing and
Yeah, I'd
they
love
get
to.
it, they don't?
There's a lot of falsehoods going around in the air. In fact, I think we had to post something online because we were getting calls and inquiries about this. Illegal immigrants or people working here outside of legal status, if you prefer, but the allegation is, and the falsehood that's being spread, is that illegal immigrants are bankrupting Social Security. This is categorically, objectively false. In point of fact, the Act prohibits illegal immigrants from receiving any benefits from Social Security. And the truth is that illegal immigrants actually pay into Social Security about $22 billion a year that they will never see a dime of coming back to them. They don't earn credit, they'll never see a dime of it, but they put in $22 billion into Social Security that goes to this trust fund that allows us to pay beneficiaries. So thank you for asking. It is absolutely false that illegal immigrants are bankrupting Social Security. Not true.
Can I get a foghorn on the truck and go, not true?
Yeah. Please.
Thank you. Just one go-round, Professor. Is there something you'd like to add to any of this?
No, I mean, I think we live, unfortunately, in a world where there's lots of mythology, and those myths get perpetuated. And I hear it in students who say, "Well, I'm never going to get Social Security; it's going to go bankrupt." And I sort of explain, like, worst case scenario, you're still getting 72 cents on the dollar. Like, it's not so. I think there's so much misconception. I think this issue, but immigrants, it just goes on and on. And the truth is that it's complicated and it's hard to put this into sound bites. And so I think, it's one of those things we're really trying to do better at, is explaining, whether it's to students or the general public or through our research, what these programs are and how they interact with each other. It's not as if this is an isolated program that doesn't have, if we cut Social Security, guess what? We're gonna have to pay out more in food benefits. Guess what? This is a balloon, and if we squeeze it, it's gonna pop out somewhere else. So just trying to help more people understand the sort of complexities of these systems. And I wish it was as simple as, wave a magic wand and, cut benefits, but that's not the way it works. It's not.
And I do think that some of this is not just misinformation, but disinformation. I mean, Jim, you were talking about death by 1,000 cuts. And as I said, they all say they love the program, but we can't afford it. And the idea is, if you think you're going to get nothing, and then they cut your benefits, these are earned benefits, they cut your benefits by half, you'll go, thank you, rather than, wait, you're stealing my money. This is deferred compensation. So the question, it's a matter of values, not affordability.
Commissioner O'Malley, you looked at me for a second. Did you want to say something real quick?
No, I wanted to hear Jim Roosevelt say something.
He was my king of final speakers, Mr. Roosevelt.
Well, sometimes people ask me, you know, how important is Social Security in our economy and in our government and in our country overall? And sometimes I give a theoretical answer because of it. It's the way we take care of our friends, our neighbors, our parents, our grandparents, and our children is extremely important. But the New York Times economics writer, Paul Krugman, has another way of putting it, and he bases it on the dollars involved and the percentage of the government's attention that it should get. And he says the United States government is actually a very large insurance company with an army.
That leaves us with a different way of looking at it, for sure. I think we have time for 2 quick questions. If somebody in the audience is burning.
3 people are burning.
Hi. First of all, I don't think any of us could put into words how much we appreciate your grandparents and the people who worked with them to give us the system that we have today and that we cherish today. They're brilliant. They were just brilliant people. But my question is for Professor Collins. Has anybody looked into the effect of Social Security on the overall economy during times of distress, meaning during times of recession, high unemployment? Because it would seem to me that you've got a pool of people that has a guaranteed income that has potentially got to keep us from devolving into a depression during these times, and which makes it a security net, not just for individuals, but for the economy as a whole, which speaks to also people like Warren Buffett really benefiting from the program, probably more than anybody else in terms of dollars in his pocket, and the rightfulness of asking those people to pay in more.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and there's no research study that's going to show that Social Security doesn't have a huge, powerful, and very positive economic impact. And it's the short term, like you say, when there's a downturn. There's also when somebody has a shock within their family and that support there. But in the long run, it's, you know, people saying, I know I have support in case I'm disabled, or I know I have support that I won't have to take care of my parents, so I'm going to invest more in my education. I'm going to go to college longer. I'm going to work longer. So it really, it's not just the short term or the within the family. It's people making different decisions about their careers and about the things that they can do in life. And so it is fundamental to our well-being, our financial well-being, and to the other parts of our life. And, you know, it's really impossible to think about a world where it didn't exist. It's just become so much part of how families are organized and how really society is organized now.
I'll tell you what, I thought about what would happen if it didn't exist when the pandemic hit. Could you imagine these folks sitting here were told on one day, like everybody else, you can't come into work anymore, you got to go home. And, oh, by the way, make sure everybody gets their check on time every month in the right amount. Could you imagine what would have happened if they hadn't done that? Some of the managers, at risk to their own families, had to go in and open the mail. And but that would have had a cascading effect. Our country came out of that pandemic much better than other countries with a softer landing, and I have no doubt that a part of it was the fact that Social Security kept going all through that pandemic.
I think that's exactly right. Another example was 2008-9 with the Great Recession, with the housing market and all of that. Many say that if it hadn't been for Social Security, we would have had a Great Depression. It was exactly what you were saying, that there was a steady source of income for families, even if the younger people were unemployed.
More questions?
And then we'll get to you. I think
I can use my outdoor voice too, if that's okay. For a comment and a question. So I have a 103-year-old mother in Michigan who's blind, very hard of hearing, and lives in her house. Her Social Security check puts a smile on her face at 103. It's 90% of her income. If she didn't have that check, I don't know how she would get along. I would be chipping in. My sister goes there every day. So kudos to the concept of Social Security and the ability of letting a 103-year-old mother still live in her house. So thank you. Now for the question. So recently I was at a IRA meeting in Milwaukee, and we had a government employee representative come speak before us about the terrible condition of employment, lack of employment potential within the Social Security Administration. That is, you don't have enough people. So when we talk about death by 1,000 cuts, candidates and our people that run for Congress are good about talking the talk, going into an election, coming out of the election, not so much. What I'm concerned about is not having enough facts and data to jump on that issue of making sure you have the manpower you need to get that work done. It's so vital. So can you provide us or tell us how to get that information? Because I can't write my congressman and give them facts if I don't have any.
Yes, sir.
I need facts on that information.
Yeah, thank you. There is on our website, the Social Security website, you'll see an icon that says Security Stat. And Security Stat is a process of management that drives us every 2 weeks, like Agile. But the senator asked me at my confirmation hearing, how quickly can you show to us and to the public the true state of Social Security? You know, timing, the delivery of service, productivity trends over 7 years. And I told him in 60 days. And he scoffed and laughed, and he said, sure, 60 days. But I knew because of what they did in COVID that these cats have collected a lot of data for a long time. So that site, if you click onto the Security Stat, you'll not only see how we deliver over time on those main things, but it also has a very important first two graphs that show you the trend line in an upward movement for the numbers of customers and the actual trend line year by year that goes declining to bring us down now to a 50-year low. There's another graph in there about the truth that we used to operate on just 1.2% overhead for the benefits that we pay out. Any other insurance company in the private sector is much more. Allstate is 19% overhead. Liberty Mutual, Liberty Biberty, is 23% overhead. When we operated well, we operated on just 1.2% overhead to benefits. And that's now been reduced to less than 1%, and that's what, you know, the 50-year low looks like.
If I could just mention, what you said about your mother reminds me of something that actually really frosts me when you hear people say, we spend too much money on our older population and not enough on our children. I like to try to respond to that by saying Social Security is actually a family program. Social Security is a program that means kids can go to college because their grandparents have earned benefits. And same thing, you in the real sandwich that you're in, you can have a good life for yourself and for your children and so on because your mother continues to have benefits that no other program in the world, public or private, would continue to pay out at 100, 104, whatever she is. Hopefully they'll continue to do it to 110. But when people talk about Social Security as favoring the elderly, put aside the fact that we have benefits for survivors. just in terms of not having to devastate our lives to take care of our older relatives. It's a family program.
Thank you. Okay, last question here.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for shedding some really clear light on the program and such a foundational program for the entire United States. But I have a quick question, and that is, with all of the misinformation, disinformation, the 1,000 cuts, so on and so forth, kind of starving the beast, do you fear that that is sort of a nefarious, insidious way of privatizing the whole system?
Well, others may have other opinions. Nancy asked me, Ms. Altman reminded me that Congress has not approved the budget for this entire year yet. They've only did 3 months. So they will be coming together after the election. And President
December
Biden,
20th. Yeah.
President Biden has, when they did the 3-month vote, he came right back saying, you need to provide $1.3 billion in anomaly funding for Social Security's customer service. You could have done it in this first thing. You didn't do it. Deeply disappointed. You need to do that. Well, I was talking to one gentleman who's a chair of one of the major committees, and he said, you know, it's not like anybody up here was angry at Social Security. We just kind of took our eye off the ball. So I don't fear anything. And I continue to hope. But Nancy's going to have a different opinion for you.
And
I have a very different opinion. Oh, go ahead, did you want to?
Well, I'm going to have a different opinion, which is,
go ahead.
you heard earlier during the slideshow about the people around my grandfather who helped put Social Security together. There are people around one of our presidential candidates who are, I think, economic nuts, who could try to take this apart. That's what I fear. And yes, my grandfather was right. No damn politician would dare to do away with Social Security. It's those people who are crusaders against government and against human needs that I'm scared of.
Yeah, I mean, Jim and I agree. And let me be even a little more specific. And that is that I think, first of all, by definition, if you cut Social Security, you are privatizing it because people have to have economic security, have to have income, and the only other place to put the money is through savings. So either directly or indirectly. But there is, the issue should be, this is too important a program not to be done, not to be, as they say, there's going to be legislation, not to have that done in the open, transparently, with votes that are clear. What a lot of, what they don't say they're opponents to Social Security, but they clearly are. What they want to do is go behind closed doors, come up with something, or have a fast-track process with a commission, and then they've got to vote on it, just up or down. They can't amend it. That is very dangerous, because that is the way they'll be able to cut it, and none of you will know who to blame, because it's, hey, we had to do it for the deficit or whatever.
You have to be careful of, because in the 1983 amendments to Social Security, which were the last, there have been amendments to Social Security all along as the economy changed. So we know about some of them in terms of expanding to cover disability and so on. But in the 1983 amendments, there were cuts as well as benefit increases. And people don't realize that so much because they weren't outright dollar cuts. They were things like reducing the age for dependent children to receive benefits to 18 instead of when they finished college, and so on. Those are the things that I think you have to really be careful of in a closed-door negotiating committee.
But
it's very much like base closures. Base closures were the base closure commissions were created because the political courage to close bases was overwhelmed, was non-existent. No member of Congress wanted to close a base in their own district, and neither did their colleagues, and so on. So they created the base closure commissions. All right, that was explicitly to eliminate certain things that existed in the military. What I worry about is a closed-door commission that comes up with things like the elimination of supporting college students that people don't know are coming down the pike.
But let me end on an optimistic note, and that is that, as I say, as polarized as we are, poll after poll after poll shows that 80%, or even more, of the American people support Social Security. Even young people, if you ask them, do you think it's going to be there for them? You say no. You say, well, do you think it should be cut? No, because they know they've got parents, grandparents who rely on it. So so as long as we remain aware and informed, there is no way that Congress will be able to cut this program, and in fact, we are going to get it expanded. But again, it's important, and it's I think valuable to appreciate again what your grandfather achieved is something that even in this crazy polarized time, we are united.
So that concludes our program. Thank you,
Well put, by the way.
panelists. What's that?
Well put.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, panelists, so much. Moderator Vaughn Ashby. We are Social Security past, present, and future, bringing the Wisconsin idea back home. We are run by the people, we are financed by the people, and we are for the people. So let's keep it that way for generations to come. Thank you all.